So nice. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm here with Josh Tetrick, the founder and CEO of Eat Just. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. First, I'd like to kick this off by asking you to tell us a little bit about your journey to get here. How did you come up with the idea of Eat Just, and how did you start your company?
Good to be with you. We started about 9 years ago. And the mission of our company is to see about building a food system in a world in which we don't need to slaughter a single animal or tear down a single tree or use a single drop of antibiotics to eat all the meat that we enjoy, whether that's fried chicken or hamburgers or pork chops. There are a lot of things that are wrong with the food system, but we think at the tip of the spear, what's wrong with the food system is the industrialization of animal protein. Whether you're looking at climate change, whether you're looking at the state of the ocean outside my window right now, whether you're looking at the reason why we're not in person today, COVID-19, which is just an unnecessarily abstract way of saying a disease that comes from a non-human animal to a human animal because of things that we do. When you peel back the onion on all this, what you find is that we've decided to slaughter way too many animals and feed them way too much soy and corn. And there's a different, better way. And we go about solving it today by focusing on two big categories: the egg and meat. There's an assumption that people make that an egg needs to come from an animal. We think it's much better if it comes from a plant, and we made a product called Just Egg that does that. And there's another assumption that's pretty commonly held, that is, in order to eat an animal, you need to slaughter an animal. That's also not true. We were the first company in the world to launch what's called cultivated or cultured meat. When we landed in Singapore, and for the first time in over 1,000 years, human beings can spend their money on real meat that doesn't require all the things we don't necessarily believe in. So that's what we're up to.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would love to dive a little deeper into the process of how Eat Just has become the first company in the world to sell cultured meats. That's a huge milestone and huge accomplishment. So congratulations on that. Can you tell us all a little bit more about the process, how that happened, how you decided to invest in this industry, first of all, and how you came about to do it in Singapore? And I would love to also hear about, the customer reaction, how it's going so far, since it's been, I believe, a couple of months now.
Yeah. Well, so the way to think about cultivated meat is to first understand what we mean when we say conventional meat. Not the abstraction of conventional meat, but what are we actually talking about when we talk about conventional meat? So in the world of chickens, we're talking about 67 billion chickens that are on the planet at any given moment. And those chickens are hungry, so they're eating a lot of soy and corn. And the soy and corn is not falling from the sky. It needs to grow somewhere. And often we take bulldozers and knock down rainforests. And instead of rainforests that are carbon sinks with all that biodiversity, we plant soy and corn. We feed the chickens, and then we slaughter the chickens and we eat fried chicken, right? That's essentially what the process looks like. So what cultivated meat is the end part, the nutritionals, the taste, the flavor, the cultural identity that you want, without all those things that maybe you don't want, like the slaughter of the animal and like the deforestation of our forests and the acceleration of climate change. It starts with a single cell, and you can get that cell from a biopsy of an animal or a cell bank or even the root of a feather. Then you identify vitamins and minerals, amino acids to feed that cell. And then you culture it, you cultivate it in a large stainless steel vessel called a bioreactor or fermenter. And then the end product literally is meat. So if any of the folks watching right now go to Singapore and order one of our 3 chicken dishes on Food Panda, don't do so if you have a chicken allergy, because you'll have an allergic outbreak. Don't do so if you're a strict vegan, because it very much is not vegan. But from an impact perspective, ultimately, we think this is going to be the dominant meat consumed on the planet, simply because it's a smarter, more efficient way to make meat for people without any of the compromises. We think it's more likely than not that the U.S. will be next. We're working closely with USDA and FDA, China sometime after that, and then Europe sometime after that. It's been really good to see how consumers react to it. About 70% of people said it tastes as good or better than chicken. 88% of people said they feel really good about eating it. 2/3 of the people we surveyed say they could imagine removing conventional chicken or beef or pork from their diet and only eating this. 80% of restaurants that we talked to said not only would they put it on the menu, but they could imagine this being the only meat on the menu. And I think this only thing is a really important deal for us, because if you think about it in the context of transportation, our planet doesn't really have time for car dealerships to continue selling internal combustion engine driven cars. We don't really have time for that anymore. Car dealerships should just sell electric cars. And we think restaurants in the future will only be selling a kind of meat that is more aligned with who we are and where the planet should be going. And we want to make that happen faster.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's amazing to hear your progress so far. And I'm excited. I'm in the US, so I'm excited for when it comes to the US. Looking forward to that. Do you think that the pandemic has shifted people's attitudes towards cultivated meat or sped this up in any way? And how has, COVID affected your businesses and how you and your processes?
Yeah, I think it's caused more people to step back and reflect on what choices have we made that leads to a world in which we have to spend our day on Zoom, right? It didn't happen by accident, right? It didn't happen because someone tripped over a vial in a lab somewhere. That's not why we're doing this. It happened because COVID-19, like malaria, like AIDS and HIV, like avian flu, is a zoonotic disease. And that's an overly complex term to say something pretty simple. It's just a disease that comes from a non-human animal, like a bat or a chicken, to me and you, because of things that we do. And I think even though not everyone sort of fully gets the concreteness of that, I think they feel like something is off. And I think when we feel like something is off, we begin to think differently about how we're orienting our own lives. We begin to think a little bit differently about what we have for breakfast. We begin to think about how interconnected we actually are. And I think it ends up having in effect where countries, policymakers, consumers want change faster. And it's sometimes hard to pinpoint the exact correlation, but it's more of a broader shift that's happening. And that's one of the real positive benefits about the tragedy that COVID has been, that it's accelerating people opening up their eyes a bit more. Now, I will say the younger you get, the more you're not held down by some of these common assumptions that we all make. I spoke to a group of young people, 7-year-olds in Singapore back in the day, and it took them 10 seconds to understand why not slaughtering an animal but eating an animal made sense, because they're not filled with all the assumptions that we have. The older that you get, the more you think, well, I'm not sure an electric car makes sense. The older you get, you make sure, well, maybe you do need to slaughter an animal to eat an animal. And the truth is that assumption is just not true anymore. We can eat all the meat that we want while making sure that we have oceans we can swim in and forests we can walk through and chicken that tastes really good.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I definitely agree.
I'm partial to the ocean, by the way, because because of the thing. I'm hanging out in Kauai, and there's an ocean with sea turtles who've been navigating the ocean for about 100 million years outside of me. So you might hear me talk about the ocean a little bit more than usual.
No, that's great. I'm definitely very jealous right now. Well, thank you for that. I definitely agree that the pandemic has forced people to think a little more thoughtfully about where their food is coming from and how the food that they're eating is affecting the not only the planet but each other. I would love to hear about your thoughts on the industry, both like the plant-based meat industry as well as the cultivated industry, and where you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years, as well as where you see Eat Just being in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think there are a few things that are true about the industry. So I'll start off with the positive. So many more plant-based companies, many more cultivated meat companies are going to be started this year than ever before. More people are going to be eating cultivated meat as we continue to commercialize and others do it, and more people are consuming plant-based meat. So that's true. So if you just look at it through that lens, it's all good. Like, we're rolling higher velocities, more points of distribution, 3, 4, 5, 10x growth. And at the same time, today, more people are eating industrialized animal protein than they were yesterday. Tomorrow, more people are eating industrialized animal protein than they are today. And that's because people are lifting themselves out of poverty. And as that process happens in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, people want chicken, beef, pork, eggs, and other animal protein, right? That's true. And what that tells me about the industry is we got to move a lot faster. We've got to be able to meet people where they are. The truth is, it shouldn't be necessary that a company like mine exists, or a company like all the other great companies in the space exist, because we can all just eat squash and arugula and kale and apples, and it's the healthiest way to eat, and it's far and away the most sustainable way to eat. Just like maybe it shouldn't be necessary for a company like Tesla to exist if everyone just rode their bike or walked to work. But we're imperfect, right? We've got to meet human beings where they are. And I think the industry needs to go a lot faster. I think we need more companies. I think we need more capital allocated to it. And we can't think, everything is just going okay now, because we see all this growth. That's important to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is I was listening to Berkshire Hathaway's annual meeting this weekend, and Warren Buffett was talking about how in 1903, after Ford released the Model 3, there were over 400 car companies that started within a few years after that. And as this century, as the 21st century started, there were only 10 left. And I think the other thing that's true that people have to acknowledge is that you can have the technology, you can have the brand, you can be aligned with a so-called trend. But if you're not actually executing, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't. What happened to all those car companies, right? They were right along the line of transportation exploding in the country, connecting them, but they're no more. So there's real hard work of sourcing, of operationalizing technology, of building a brand, of raising capital, of executing some of the boring parts maybe of running a business that has to be the case in both the cultivated meat space and the plant-based space for this to be real. And again, real for me is when the vast majority of chicken, beef, pork, and other animal proteins don't require slaughtering a single animal or tearing down a single tree. That's real, right? That's when we really transition things.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I would love to answer, or love to hear you answer, regarding some of the challenges that you've had bringing your product to market. The first one is, how receptive have regulators been with regards to cultivated meat? And what do you think about creating some sort of certification for cultivated meat akin to Dr. Bronner's regenerative organic label?
So regulators, this is new to regulators. So Singapore's the first country to clear the sale of cultured meat when they cleared it last year for us, and then we went on to sell. Overall, they have been receptive. They've been very focused on the science, and the evidence, not the politics of it. But I do think we have to acknowledge that this like self-driving cars, it is new, and we need to give folks an opportunity to wrap their brains around it and ask the hard questions to try to get at it. But when Singapore gave us clearance, what they were saying is this is safe for human consumption. They appointed a safety panel. They looked at how we acquire our cells and nutrients we feed our cells, how we scale it up, what the pathogen or the lack of pathogen content is in our end product. And we expect to go through a similar process with the FDA, the USDA, with regulators in the EU and in China. The regulation stuff's going to happen, though. It's just a matter of time. Just like fully self-driving cars, it's just a matter of time. And the thing that feels bizarre and maybe strange in the moment becomes normal pretty quick. I was asking a guy who is one of the forerunners of the streaming music industry about this, and he said in 2002, he did a poll of people. He asked thousands of people, would you be willing to only stream your music and not own it, right? Only stream. 3% of people could imagine a world in which they didn't own most of their music, but they stream most of their music. But of course, that's the world that we live in today. And the process of cultivated meat is the process of normalization. It's one restaurant, and then a home delivery, and then more restaurants, and then the US, and then Europe and China. And then before you know it, it's not even cool enough for you to ask me questions about it anymore, right? Because it's just normal. It's just the boring way that we eat meat. And that's what will happen here. And then in terms of certification, I think it could make sense in the future. I think right now we're just focused on working with regulators to focus on the safety elements of it, because that's first and foremost the most important. But I think that very well can make sense in the future.
Sure. I'll combine this next question sort of with something that you had mentioned earlier. So we have one question regarding how long it took Singapore regulators to grant you permission, but I would love to hear that as in conjunction with how quickly you think sort of the attitudes in Singapore have changed towards it, and do you think that that's going to be reflected, similarly in the US and other countries as well?
Yeah. So there's a little bit more awareness in Singapore. About 49% in our last survey of folks in Singapore are aware of what cultivated meat is, compared to 32% in the US. The best way to change attitudes about owning your music or streaming your music, right, or about owning internal combustion engine car or an electric car, or eating conventional meat or cultivated meat, is just give it to people, right? That's far and away the most effective thing. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in, well, I asked my mom or asked my brother and my friend, and they didn't seem to think it was made sense, so therefore it doesn't make sense as an idea. We never think new ideas make sense as an idea. It's always strange when it's first proposed, but then it gets out there and it makes our lives better because it's lower costs. It's more connected to the kind of planet that we're trying to live in, and it becomes a thing that's accepted. And we're already seeing the beginnings of that in Singapore, right? We started off in a fancy restaurant. The very first group of people to pay for this were a group of kids between 12 and 18. And then very quickly, we moved to a partnership with Food Panda, where if you're in Singapore today, think about how fast this advanced. If you're in Singapore today, you can open up Food Panda on your phone right now, and you can order a chicken Caesar salad, a chicken katsu curry, or a chicken and rice with real chicken, not plant-based chicken, real chicken that didn't require slaughtering a chicken. And a guy will come on a bike and deliver it right to your door. Things change. And I think the most effective way, again, to get that change is get it out there, talk to people about it, but also talk to people about, hesitations they have about it. One of the questions that we've asked people is, why would you hesitate to eat this? And what they say is, well, I'm still unsure about the process. What do you mean it comes from a cell? What's a bioreactor, right? Very fair questions. So I think in getting it out there and building a brand, you got to build a brand that is directly answering that. You got a bioreactor is a stainless steel vessel where we're cultivating meat. Here's an image of it, right? You can even visit it one day and see how the meat is made. So I think we owe people those straight answers, so that the hesitations that people have eventually go away.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen GFI's comparisons to cultivated meat and like making beer, for example. So hopefully with further education, I think people will become increasingly accepting of this new way of producing food. So it's really exciting to see. I would like to shift gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. So obviously this is a conference hosted by a business school. We'd love to hear about your journey to becoming an entrepreneur. How did you start this? If you have any, what are the biggest challenges you faced as an entrepreneur, and what advice do you have for anyone in the audience who's an aspiring entrepreneur?
Yeah, a few things. So I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship growing up. I didn't even know entrepreneurship was a career path. I thought I was going to be a professional football player. I played college football for a second and realized I probably wasn't good enough to play in the NFL after everyone was pretty much better than me. I did a little bit of work in sub-Saharan Africa, and I felt pretty frustrated by the pace of progress at the international institution that I was working at, some nonprofits I was working at. And I read a book called Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid more than 10 years ago. And the book talks about how the most effective way to solve the world's most urgent problems is through capitalism. And it didn't look at capitalism as sort of a good or a bad thing. It just looked at it as a system. And with the right intention, with the right team, with the right idea, with the right business model, you can use this system of capitalism to solve problems faster. And that really appealed to me. So I was lucky enough to have a best friend who's also the co-founder of the company, who really opened up my eyes to how cruel our current food system can be, how irrational, insane it can be. And he was really the one that pushed me to try to use my energy to start a company that would make the food system better. And then I raised a little bit of money. I had a friend who let me hang out on her couch for about 6 months as I figured out how to do this. And I ran some experiments in her bathtub and her sink. Eventually raised a bit of money, moved to San Francisco, and then really started hiring a team. And I think that's lesson one is just because you don't have a background in biochemistry or in food science or in culinary or in process engineering, because I don't, doesn't keep you from starting a company like this. If you identify the right people and you surround yourself with them, you can start a company. You can focus on what you're good at. And you can partner with them to drive the technical work. I think the second lesson that I've learned is you have many more blind spots than you even think that you do, and be on a constant lookout for where those blind spots are. One of the biggest blind spots I had was I thought just because we could do something in the lab, that meant we could do it at a large scale. And that turned out to be wrong. And it probably cost the company 2-3 years and over $30 million of wasted time because of that blind spot. So you got to be really curious about what you're not seeing, about the gaps that you have. And it's not about, you just can't be sensitive to it. You gotta be hungry for where those are. And then probably the single biggest lesson that I've learned through this is that if you're out there, if you're listening to this and you want to start a company, it will not be the most peaceful experience. This is not like a path if you just want to have lots of serenity in your day starting a company. It is hard. It will push you. It will test you. But if you're doing something meaningful and you continue to put your head down, you're going to have a lot of challenges. You're going to have a lot of bad things happen. People you care about will leave. People that you thought were by your side might decide differently. Sometimes it'll be easy to raise capital. Sometimes it'll be really hard to raise capital. But if you put your head down and you focus on the work, not noise, but the work, things tend to take care of themselves. The biggest advice I have to everyone listening here, though, is if you're really going to start a company, you're thinking about working with a company, you're really wasting your life if you don't focus on working or starting a company that's actually solving a real problem. And there's no better place to do that than trying to transform our food system. This is such an exciting place for young people to throw their lives into making something better. Don't let the noise of the world, which your mom or boyfriend or girlfriend wants you to do, pull you away from what you know is right. That's hard, but that's definitely the best path.
Great, thank you for that. We have about 2 minutes left, so I just want to finish up with this question that I'm going to kind of rephrase a little. What is next on the horizon for Eat Just? I know that you've had a super busy year. So what do you think is going to be like the next product that you guys are working on? If you can answer that, or what's the area that's most interesting to you guys as a company?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty focused on, we have an egg from a plant. We want to sell it to more people. We want to continue to make it better. Eventually, we want Just Egg to be the most commonly consumed egg in the world. So an egg that comes from a plant, we want more human beings to eat that than an egg from a chicken. And we want them to eat it because it'll be lower cost, it'll be better tasting, it'll just make you feel better about eating it. There's a lot of work that we're doing to expand in new countries, whether Europe or Korea, or expanding our work in China. And then for meat, we're scaling. So even though you can order it on the Food Panda app in Singapore, if you want to order it for 1,000 of your friends, you couldn't. We just don't have the capacity right now. So there's a lot of work to build out the capacity to make not just hundreds, but hundreds of thousands and millions of pounds of this. And then eventually take this to the United States, China, Europe. And there's a lot of operational work that needs to be done to make that happen. So egg and meat, scale up, continue to make it better, building a brand around it, and then wake up and do it again.
Okay, great. No, I love to hear that, and I'm really excited for you Just cultivated chicken to come to the U.S. I'll definitely be first in line. Josh, we're about at time, but I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today, even though you're in Hawaii. I'm sure you had a lot of other things you could have been doing, so we really appreciate you coming here and sharing your message with us. Thank you very much, and we'll see everyone at the next panel on innovative CPG. Thank you.
Wow.